The games in this top 10 list aren't just one person's personal favorites, but 10 out of over 50 of the most highly rated, popular, and award-winning family board games in the last 20 years. To put this list together, I looked up many board game awards for family board game criteria and did my best to compare them against their ratings and popularity. Now, the result is something that I personally might not highly recommend, but it is definitely something that people would agree have had an impact in the world of board games, at least as far as families are concerned. But aside from my personal criticisms, some of these games won awards for something they did that was new and exciting and had an impact that may have worn off a little as the years have gone by. So in this video, I'll talk about why these games had such a huge influence, as well as some of the reasons why they might not be as exciting anymore, or really what you might want to play instead. Before I get started, it's worth mentioning that the algorithm that I used to compare these games took into consideration the Board Game Geek rating. And in my opinion, the Board Game Geek rating is a little biased towards more complex games. So I noticed that some simpler but very popular games were a little lower on the list, possibly because of this, and some people who play a lot of family board games might be wondering why they're not listed. But if I were to briefly mention the games that came into position 13, 12, and 11, those would be Carcassonne, Just One, and Ticket to Ride. I won't be talking about those games in this video, but if you were wondering, they were very, very close. Throughout this video, I'll be comparing board games using this rating system, which was newly updated to feature this attribute. If you'd like to learn more about that, I would recommend checking out that video. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started at number 10. Number 10 is a game that exhibits characteristics that you're going to see very often among family board games. It's a game that keeps everything very simple while showcasing intuitive and fun, exciting mechanics. The game is Splendor. So, how does Splendor keep things simple? Well, on your turn, you can really only do basically two things. You can either buy cards, or you can take currency that you can use later to buy cards. Splendor is an engine building game because the cards that you buy aid you in buying even more cards, and then eventually those cards are worth victory points, and of course, like many other games, the objective is to get the most victory points. So the game is something that I would call a filler game today because it doesn't have much to theme or complexity, and even strategy. There's not very much going on, but it is a very tactile game with excellent components that are fun to hold and play with. If you'd like something that has a little bit more meaning to it, I would recommend a game called Little Factory, which is almost identical to Splendor, but makes a lot more sense, as the things that you're trading are often related to each other. The next game is a board game that is so popular it almost single-handedly introduced the world to a commonly known problem in cooperative board games. The problem is the alpha player, and the board game is Pandemic. Now, let me explain. If you're not familiar with Pandemic, it's actually one of the first cooperative board games I've ever played. The theme of the game is to save the world from vicious diseases by moving players around a world map, treating the disease in different countries, and working together to build the cures and eradicate the disease. Now, that's an excellent game, and thematically the game has fantastic tension. But the problem is the alpha player. The alpha player is the most experienced player, or the person who's teaching the board game, who leads other players through all of the thinking. For example, I've played this game many times with people who walk away saying, well, I think that was fun, but I don't really know what I was doing. I sort of feel like I leaned on your expertise. And that's not really an experience I recommend, especially when you're playing with your family or possibly your kids, where, you may really feel like there's a great move there, but you kind of have to sit back and see if the kids figure it out. That's not really very fun. It's a lot more interesting of a game when you're playing with people with whom you can see eye to eye. Now, I struggle to name an alternative to Pandemic that is much like Pandemic and resolves the problem of the alpha player. There is a great game that I'll mention later in this list, and it might be worth trying some games that have a traitor mechanic, which is where one person is secretly against the rest of the players. One game that comes to mind is Shadows of Camelot, or another game that is very simple and excellent to play cooperatively and was on the list of 50 but didn't make the top 10 is The Mind. Number 8 is a game that is stunning and strategic and fun and like only slightly interactive so that most players can focus on their own thing. It made a big splash and is still making a big splash today. The game Lost Ruins of Arnak. Lost Ruins of Arnak is a very well-rounded game. And it really does so many things well. It's not very hard to teach. There's a lot of very interesting decision-making going on. The components are beautiful. The theme of like exploring this jungle is very interesting. The only problem that I've ever had with Lost Ruins of Arnak is for some reason it just doesn't really seem meaningful. And maybe that's because it seems like the whole point of the game is to take cards that can turn into money, that can turn into compasses, that can turn into arrowheads, that can turn into tablets, that can turn into gems, that can turn into victory points. It's like this long chain of just converting things. And you're trying to do that by playing cards. I personally like to find games that have a little bit more thematic significance. At number 7 is a cooperative card game that fixes the problem of the alpha player. The game is The Crew, and it's a cooperative trick-taking game. Players are dealt cards that they have to keep a secret. They all have a very well-understood objective, and they have to work together without telling each other what their cards are in order to meet the objectives. This is an excellent game. I have played it so many times that my cards are getting kind of worn out, which is maybe my only criticism about the components, but I don't know if it can be avoided. This is a game that hits the table over and over again. When I introduce it to my friends buy it immediately. Now, I did do a video where I suggested 5 alternatives to The Crew, and you can check that out in the card to the side or in the description. But The Crew was and remains an excellent cooperative game that families can play. Number 6 is yet another game that exhibits that characteristic of just being really stripped down and emphasizing excellent mechanics. The game has so many expansions, and I think everyone knows it's going to be on this list. The game is Dominion. Now, Dominion came out years ago. It is still such a popular game. For many people, it's an entry game. They play Dominion early on, and then they get up into some more heavier games. But the nice thing about Dominion is a deck builder game. If you haven't played it, it's almost like a canonical classic card game. You draw up to your hand limit, and on your turn, you can play cards, and then when you're all done, you can buy more cards. The interesting thing about Dominion is that all of the cards and everything that's available to you varies depending on which expansions you play. The next game is also classified as a party game, the game Codenames. Now, Codenames is a word game played in teams. Like many other word games, the objective is for players to gain points by having one person, the clue giver, give one-word clues to the members of their team and see if they can guess them. Now, what makes this game unique is that the available words that can be guessed are on cards laid on the table, and the person giving the hints can only give a one-word hint that could trigger more than one word out of those on the table. And then, of course, the opponent's words are on the table as well. So you want to give hints that can trigger your words without your teammates accidentally choosing opponent's words. This is a game I've played dozens of times with my friends. Again, a party game. I haven't yet played it with my kids yet because, well, still my entire family can't read. My youngest daughter is 5. She's still working on it. So this is a game I definitely look forward to. It has just huge success every time I've played it before, and it definitely belongs on this list. If you love Codenames, or if you want to try something a little different, Decrypto is an excellent game, as is trap words. So I recommend you check those out as well. At number 4 is a game that I've put off playing for a really long time, because if you've been watching this channel, you know that I don't really get excited about games that have a lot of luck involved, and this next game, it may as well be bingo. I mean, this game has a lot of luck involved. I have a rating for luck on here that goes up to high. Maybe this would get a very high rating. The game is Quacks of Quedlinburg. In the game, this is a press your luck style game. So players are drawing tokens from a bag and adding them to their potion. They're trying to fill their pot with ingredients, and they get victory points depending on how much they can fill their pot. But if they put too many ingredients in the pot, some ingredients may cause an explosion. And that, of course, is going to have a negative impact. So you've got to really press your luck in this game. And if that wasn't enough, there are also cards that are going to come out that are going to have an impact. And every round, the person who's in first place for the round is going to roll a die and get an additional bonus. So it's luck stacked on top of luck on top of luck. But as a family game, man, my kids love this game. It's very, very fun for the kids. Now, as an adult, I gotta admit, like, okay, you know me, right? Like, I'm always critical of games that have a lot of luck. Take what I have to say with a game of salt, because this is not really a game that's for me. It does kind of feel like I'm playing it for the kids' sake to an extent, but there's some excellent replayability because the tokens that you're playing have effects, and there are many variations where, each token can have a different effect based on the game setup. And I think that's really cool. It's really easy to learn. It's an excellent introduction game, and a lot of fun. Admittedly, it is a lot of fun. Quacks of Quedlinburg. The next game is a game that's been around for years, and it's a pioneer in popular card drafting games. It's the game Seven Wonders. Now, personally, I don't think Seven Wonders belongs on a list of family board games. I think it's too complicated, but it does have some really exciting mechanics going on. Players are all being dealt cards. They can choose one of those cards, and they pass them to the player on their left or right, and play continues in that way, drafting a card and passing. At the end of every single round, the cards that they've drafted have an impact. Now, the thing with Seven Wonders is that it created a new category of games. There are so many games that follow in this style. There's Sushi Go, there's this donut game whose name I'm forgetting the name of, there's Boomerang, there's the Draftosaurus. There are so many drafting style games that follow in this pattern, and Seven Wonders was the game that started all of this. So it deserves respect for the influence that it has, but I definitely think that a more family style board game needs to simplify all of the rules. The next game is a game that has won so many awards, it's almost obnoxious to me. It's not my favorite game, but it's the game Azul. Now, the reason it had such a great impact, I have called it the Candy Crush of board games. This is an extremely tactile game. The pieces, they feel almost like dominoes, like if you were to cut a domino in half. They've got some weight to them. And it's actually satisfying just to pick the pieces up and move them around. So what is my problem with it? Why is the game obnoxious to me? Well, I really have two problems. One is that the game doesn't have any thematic meaning, but that's nothing new. I'm always complaining about games that aren't thematically significant. Aside from that, my problem with the game is that it can sometimes be the case that tiles stack up and create a option that is not desirable to anybody. And so eventually, the game becomes about avoiding this terrible thing. And everyone knows that eventually someone has to take this terrible pile of tiles. And the result is that they're going to add it to their board and only get negative points. I don't like the fact that there's a move where everyone just wants to avoid something. It's much more interesting to have objectives that you are pursuing. So, if you agree with me on that, you might want to try Loco Momo. Loco Momo is a game that has very similar mechanics, but no negative points involved. And unfortunately, it has cardboard pieces rather than the satisfying tiles, but it might be a great alternative for you. Number 1 is Wingspan. Now, when Wingspan was announced, it was probably the most beautiful game I had ever seen up until that time. It had a dice tower that looked like a bird feeder. It had all of these amazing cards. Every single card was unique. It had these portraits of birds that looked like they came right out of a guidebook on different bird species. It had this excellent flavor text. You were like laying eggs and feeding birds. It was stunning. I bought it. I bought the expansion. And it was very exciting to play. It was exciting to introduce to people because it would hit the table and people would just wow. The wow factor in this game. But I think that these days, more and more games are being released that are just stunning games. And it's no longer the case that you buy a game simply because the game is so beautiful. There are so many beautiful games. You can now take your pick between all of the beautiful games and which one you like most. So now, when I look back on Wingspan, I look at some things that I really think the game could have done better. First of all, aside from having excellent components, the game doesn't really have a lot of meaning. There's nothing in there that really makes it feel like you're a bird watcher who's, you're getting points for, I guess, building up your journal of all the birds that you've seen, I suppose, and collected. There's that. And then there's a lot of upkeep. You've got, and a lot of luck involved too. You're drawing cards to find out what birds are available to you. You can't really depend on any one strategy because there's no predicting what cards could come out later in the game. And then you're constantly rolling dice to provide the resources that you use to collect birds. So some of that stuff really falls flat. For as long as I've had this channel going, I've talked about Wingspan and I've compared it to Gizmos, which I think mechanically has a lot of the same stuff going on. It doesn't have a stronger theme, but it's stripped down and a lot more streamlined. But then, as an added bonus, the game is also very, very beautiful. So those are my thoughts on the top 10 family board games. However, as I mentioned earlier, I have my own recommendations, and I have recommendations that are reading independent. So if you have younger kids and you're looking for games that don't depend so much on reading, you might want to check out that top 10 list, which of course I'll leave a link for you. If you're interested to hear more about how I compared these games, I've decided to go ahead and upload the spreadsheet that I used onto my Patreon site. So I will leave that there. If you'd like to check that out and support me, you can check out the link to my Patreon in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.